Hello and welcome to CG Visuals, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to create this water blast effect, which was shown in one of the tutorial previews that we posted about a month ago. So this is going to be 100% in After Effects. You won't need any plugins. In fact, even the assets that we're using are going to be provided completely free in the description. So you'll be able to follow along with this without having to own any extra plugins for After Effects. We're going to go over 3D camera tracking using After Effects Camera Tracker, and we'll go into that quite in depth because this is quite a challenging shot to track in 3D. And then we'll learn how to composite all of these elements, and yeah, we should learn quite a lot. Hopefully the tutorial won't run for too long, but without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so once we've loaded up After Effects, the first thing we'll want to do is bring in the items that we're going to be working with. I've got a clip that I downloaded. You might be using something that you filmed. In this case, I just went to Envato Market and downloaded this. I just typed in drone flying over water, and I managed to get my hands on some 4K footage to use in this example. So we'll obviously drag that in, make a new comp out of it, and then we'll refer to this as the plate. Then also included with the tutorial is going to be the assets that we're going to be using. So we can have a little look at them. I'm going to upload these as a separate video. I might include the ones we use in the description just to make it a little bit easier, but we can have a look at what we've got here. So they're all HD and they've got an alpha channel, and like I said, these are just going to be included as part of the files for this tutorial, so they're completely free, but we can have a quick look at them. We've got a few interesting ones. We've obviously got like these, you may recognize them from the example. So yeah, there's just quite a few clips in here which should be quite fun to work with. So maybe if you've got a slightly different shot or a slightly different idea, you might be able to use some of those. So the first thing we're going to have to do is 3D track this. Before we even attempt to do that, we're going to want to trim down the plate so that we're only working in a more sensible range. Still going to take about 2 minutes to try and 3D track this. After Effects Camera Track isn't the best on the market, so you know, we're going to have to unfortunately have a slightly in-depth look at how we can fix this, because I can tell you from pre-recording this tutorial that it's going to fail on us. So if you don't have that option there, you can go to Windows Tracker and then select the footage and click Camera Track, and then patiently sit there and wait for the tracker to analyze the footage. I normally just leave the settings as they are just for the time being, just to see what it comes up with. I don't know what the focal length or what the lens distortion was or anything like this. I don't have any of that information, so I'm just leaving it on auto detect, and we'll see what it does. Okay, so now it's apparently solved the camera, so let's have a little look at what it's done. So it's obviously put down some tracking points for us to use. You can see it doesn't have too much of an issue when there's land, but once we get to the water, even it knows that it can't track the water. So that's going to be quite challenging, but let's see what it managed to do anyway. We can hover over these, and this will give us the information of where our ground plane is. So if we choose something like this, maybe here, and then we right click and go create null object and camera, it will set us up a scene that we can use. This null object will now give us the position of anything we want to add into the scene. So we can just add in some text, make sure we make the layer 3D of course, and then we can just copy the positional data into the text layer. So now we've hopefully got our fancy floating 3D text. And this isn't the standard way to test a track, but it just looks fun. So let's see what it managed to do. So, okay, not too bad. Let's keep going. Now we're running out of tracking points. Now it's having to use the water as a reference, but of course the water's moving, so oh no. That's what happens when you try to track water. In fact, we're even going to need one more, so we can see what happens back there. Oh dear. So now we have to look at this and decide how we can fix this. So one thing you could try doing is we could try reducing, reducing the target size, that hopefully it manages to get more tracking points, and we could also check this box to do a detailed analysis. Now that's not going to fix the issues that we've got. If we had a good track, it might just improve the accuracy a little bit, but once again we'll wait and see what it does. Okay, so it's finished solving the camera again. This time it's thrown down even more points, including on the water. So maybe it has improved the accuracy, but we'll have to test it to see. Because this shot really hinges on the 3D tracking. You can't do anything that we're going to attempt to do without having a 3D solve. Everything, putting the assets on the water. If they're going to be sliding all over the place like this, then it's just simply not going to be possible. As you can see, it's not a perfect track, but at least it's working towards the beginning. And we can get to this point where it kind of goes wrong, and this is where things are going to get really boring. And yes, so how can we fix this? We're simply going to have to, well, luckily because of the nature of the camera move, it's just tracking forward in space without much variation. It means we can really simply just remove the bad keyframes. So if we say it's good here, we'll grab these keyframes here. I've opened up the camera and I've gone to the position and orientation keyframes, and so these are all bad. So let's try deleting those, see if that fixes it. So from here to here, it's obviously kind of sliding across to the, looks like it's drifting over to the right a bit too much. So if we go to the first keyframe and select all of these, we can now make an adjustment, and it should make the same adjustment to all the keyframes. So if it was sliding over to the right a little bit, I've tried moving it to the left. Again, I have to push it over a little bit more. Okay, at least you see from what we've done now, I mean, it's passable. And then as we go forward, we can see it continues to mess up. So one little trick we can do is to just delete one of every 3 keyframes. And essentially this should just smooth out the motion. Now if you weren't insistent on trying to track a body of water, you might not have these issues. Let's see, so we've removed 1 in every 2 keyframes. It's improved it a little bit. We've still got some major issues. Let's see where it really starts to go wrong. It's kind of here. Yeah, these keyframes here are just really troublesome. So we'll get rid of those. Let's get rid of even more keyframes. Okay, it's not too bad. I'm going to get rid of this one as well. If we get rid of too many, we could potentially start having to add more back in. So we want to be a little bit careful. Yep, and then I'm just going to remove even more here. So from here it sort of feels like, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to have to allow this bit to pre-cache. Oops, we don't want to do it from the beginning. So I've checked that box from current time. Just want to cache it in from here. Sort of feels like the text is bouncing up there, doesn't it? Let's try getting rid of that one. Okay, there's still a bit of a wobble. Feels like it's definitely starting to come over too much towards the right side. So once again, I'm going to do our little trick of just moving it over. Now these floating text layers might be a little bit deceptive, so I basically want to try and create something on the surface of the water that we can use to sort of judge the perspective a little bit better. So I'm going to create a solid, and I'll just use the elliptical mask tool. We'll make this a 3D layer. Delete that null object, and we'll copy the position from our text layer. We can delete this extra text layer that we created. That was just a sort of experiment that didn't really go according to plan. Right, so now that we've got our we've created our black solid here, I'm just going to scale that up. We'll bring the opacity down a little bit. This text layer, it looks like it's hovering above the ocean, so if I bring this down, hopefully that will be close enough. See, yeah, that's what I want. I want it to look like it's actually on the ocean. I'm going to let it cache in again. Definitely when you just play it back at normal speed. We don't need to see the beginning, actually, so I'll cut that off. Just looking at the trouble area. I thought it was going to crash then, but it didn't. I guess that's the benefit of having 32 gigs of RAM. It takes a lot to make the program crash. Okay, now I have to be aware of the time here. So even though we could carry on tweaking this, I think it's actually going to work for what we want to do. I think the easiest way to test it would actually be to bring in one of our assets and see if it looks like it's working. So I'll bring in this one here. It's already at a sort of a perspective that might help us. So we'll make this a 3D layer. And I'll just copy the positional data from this dark grey solid here, which is supposed to sort of represent where our sort of water explosion is going to go. So I'll copy the positional data into our asset. I'll just hide the text layer. We can scale this up a bit. And technically we do actually want to rotate it in the same way we rotated our solid, not that way. Then of course, as well as rotating, we can also change the scale as well. Because this asset is at a sort of 45-degree angle perspective, we can play around with both the rotate. You see, it's quite interesting. The rotation is going to give us the illusion of the focal length changing, and then of course we can change the scale here, and it's all about just trying to create the illusion, because it's not actually a real thing, so it is just trying to create the illusion that it's actually there. And it's a good job we managed to get our camera track working reasonably well, because there'd just be no way you could sell this without, if it was floating even just a little bit. I mean, if you really analyze it, you might be able to see it slipping a little bit. There's also a bit of a water flow as well, so maybe we might actually want to... We could try a little trick here. Like I said, I haven't planned any of this out, so I do apologise if it seems a little bit sort of on the cuff. What I'm planning on doing here, I want to move it over without changing the actual depth. I've just moved the anchor point over there, so that now if we just uniformly increase the scale, or we can get it to look like it's actually flowing with the water. So we'll drag it over a little bit more. That's what you've got to remember about assets. They're just assets. It's up to you to try and make them work. So what I'll do is I'm just going to make a keyframe for the scale here. We'll go forward a bit. And we'll just try... Let's bring the anchor point over a little bit more. Yeah, at least then it sort of seems like it's actually being affected by the water. In fact, if we were to, let me see, we can also change the anchor point, yeah, that way as well. So the water's sort of coming towards us a little bit. Let's really exaggerate this just a little bit more. Yeah, so basically I'm just trying to get it to look like it's actually going with the water a bit. I'm going to move the anchor point even more. Put the scale up a bit more as well. Let's have a quick look at this. Yeah, most of this tutorial will be trying to implement these assets in and actually get them working. What I'm going to want to do with this scale here is we can actually see the keyframes, which is creating an unnatural movement. So I'm going to select the first one to be easies. So let's have a little look at how this looks then. I would say the most difficult part is this little water wave thing. I'm also going to play the rotation a little bit more. Now it looks like it's sort of matching the focal length a little bit. I've actually decided to just move this keyframe back all the way to here, I think. See what else. So it looks like maybe we might want to adjust this just a little bit. Of course, if we are going to do that, we need to make sure we're obviously going to be creating a new keyframe. So let's go to the first keyframe, and I'm just going to bring this in a little bit. That's not too bad. Okay, I've just been focusing on the sort of movement and the position for the time being. Of course, we can do loads of fancy stuff like put motion blur on it, which will help. That's going to help so much. Then we've got the blending modes that we can play with. I mean, let's see what screen does. Brightens it up quite a bit. We could go soft light. Then we could get a very subtle look. And we could even duplicate it. And then make the one on top maybe screen. See what multiply does. Doesn't really work. Darken's quite interesting. Lighten. Screen mode. We could keep the screen mode one, but bring the opacity down a bit. Okay, so that seems to be working, but one thing we want to do is try and define a point in which this impact thing is actually going to happen. So I'd like it to come in on this frame here, say. So we'll right click on our water foam wave layer. We'll go to time, enable time remapping, and we'll create a keyframe on the frame that we want this to happen on. And if we select the first keyframes here, should have said it automatically creates a keyframe at the beginning and the end of your timeline for the layer. We've just created a keyframe here, and by moving these ones around, it will allow us to manipulate the time and essentially time warp it. So I'll drag the beginning ones towards our keyframe, and then we'll select the keyframes that we actually made, and we'll go Control left click, and that'll essentially switch them to a sort of ease curve so that it comes in quickly, and then so it's not just such a linear change in speed. I'll bring these ones in a little bit as well. In fact, if you were to select these keyframes and go to the graph editor, we can actually see there is a slight curve happening. It's not just a linear thing, kind of curves over a bit. Might be a little bit difficult to see here, but yeah. And so the result of that is it sort of, and you know, we can make that a little bit more aggressive as well. Bring these ones over more. And I still feel like the overall size could be a little bit bigger as well. So I'll just go to these, I've just gone back to the keyframes for size, and we'll just scale these up a little bit more. I'll go to the beginning ones, scale that up a little bit too. And let's see what sort of effect that has. Also, it would make sense that these keyframes for our scale were actually coming in at the same time as our keyframes for the time remap. And of course we shouldn't even need to see this layer, so if I go Alt and then left bracket here, we can just cut this layer off so that it only comes in once our time remap starts happening. Not the most elegant way of explaining things, but like I said, there's just too much stuff to cover. It would be too complicated to try and script everything, so I really am just going off the top of my head. And let's go back to the anchor point again. And I'm just going to move the anchor point back that way because I think the way we're adjusting the scale might be sort of throwing it off a little bit. I'm also going to make a keyframe for the position as well. And I'm just going to try and sort of create the illusion of it maybe drifting over there a little bit. Might not work, but let's see. I'm going to select these keyframes here for the position. I'll go keyframe assistant, ease out. And we've got this little sort of triangle shape thing. And that is how it should look. If we go to the graph editor, we can see it's going to ease in like that. Let's go back to this thing. Let's have a little look. I'm going to go back to the time remapping. I just want to make one more adjustment. I'm actually thinking, let's create another keyframe for our time remap here. I'm going to minimize these transform options here, so we're just looking at our keyframes. I'm going to delete this keyframe that I made back there. Control left click on these ones so they go back to being linear. I'm going to drag this one over here. I'm just trying to get it, I'm just playing with the time remap just so it looks like it's expanding a little bit more. Also going to go back to the scale, and I'm going to create a keyframe for the scale here. I'm going to select this one and the last ones, and I'm just going to uniformly increase the scale a little bit more. and then Control left click on these to set them to ease. I'm just trying to make it look like it's expanding a bit more. Let's go back to the anchor point, and because I've got the anchor point all the way over here now, so when I increase the size it's actually shooting the asset off, so that might have been a slight mistake. And it's starting to get that illusion now that it's being generated, and let's play around with this scale a little bit more again. I'm also going to select these ones here, set them to ease out as well. Look at the graph editor, yeah. So it's easing in and then it's easing out into the next keyframe. Problem is, it kind of looks like it's shooting out and then it starts expanding. So let's grab these keyframes to scale. I'm just gonna extend them out a little bit. Or maybe let's actually try bringing them in. Play around with it that way. Tell you what, I'll set these ones to ease in as well. It sort of looks like it's starting to drift over to the left a little bit, and it looks a bit unnatural. It might be to do with our position keyframes. So I'm just going to cancel what we did there with the position, and maybe actually move it over a little bit, just to sort of compensate for the fact that it's being shifted over to the left by the fact that our anchor point is to the right and we're increasing the scale quite a lot. I'm also going to push this asset down a little bit as well, maybe in Z space a little bit. Doesn't really look like it's stuck to the water. Kind of difficult to judge where our ground plane is for the water. Let's see, it's definitely the keyframe we made for the scale that's causing the issue. Might just be better not to manipulate with the scale. I think it's just causing issues. It's creating the appearance that our asset is sliding over the place. I think just by deleting that keyframe it's probably going to improve things. Okay. And this is the reality of playing around with assets. I'm not going to just place it down with some pre-scripted thing and be like, and look, it works perfectly with these exact values. The whole point is we see the process and we go through iterations and constantly judge the work and make improvements to it. And there's no such thing as just, creating something in 5 minutes and having it look perfect. Like, by its nature, it's a very time-consuming thing. But at least now, finally, when we put this asset on, our water blast thing, I'm going to make it a 3D layer again. Hopefully at this point the tutorial should hopefully start to get a little bit more fun. I'm going to grab this position data, copy it into our water blast asset. We don't want the keyframes though. We'll scale this up. We'll adjust the anchor point so that it's at the best. So now if we change the scale, it's gonna, we'll be able to adjust the scale and that will all work. So let's move this over to where let's hold down Shift and that'll allow us to move it over a little bit better. Let's increase the scale. And before we do anything else, let's just see how that's working. I think I need to scale it up quite a bit. Also, I think the asset's actually clipping a little bit, as you can see. Because they're 3D layers, they can intersect each other, so we want to move that up a bit. Make sure that's not the case. We're also going to scale this up quite a bit. And let's go to the rotation of this, and we'll just adjust it a little bit. I might bring this asset towards us just a little bit. Bring it up a bit more. Let's see what that looks like. So it's definitely got a few issues. I think the angle of the water wave is actually creating a bit of a weird optical illusion. So let's go and just try and fix that a little bit. Because we're actually quite far away from it here, so it should look something like that. And then as we get closer to it, it obviously distorts because of the focal length that we've got. Now, as our water wave is drifting over to the left with the current, we might have to simulate that a little bit with this asset. Maybe saying there's like some wind that's sort of dragging it over this way as well. I'm also going to solo the asset here. We're going to create a mask that hides. The asset already comes with its own sort of little sort of water wave, just to sort of suggest that there's some sort of connection happening. But of course, we're trying to suggest that this asset's a lot more closer to us, and having that there is actually hurting it. So we can hide the mask shape path by pressing that, and that'll allow us just to adjust this a little bit, re-enable it. Make sure we're if you're having trouble selecting the mask, you can always just open this layer up and it'll allow you to select the mask a bit more easier. I think we're actually accidentally selecting the position though. Okay, there we go. Being a bit funny. Right, then let's re-enable everything else. And I definitely think this asset just needs to be so much bigger for what we're trying to suggest. Let's go back and have a proper look at it. Let's see what it looks like. I'm also just going to disable the motion blur because it's actually really slowing down our previews. It's looking quite interesting. I think what would help is if we maybe bring in another asset in a bit. Let me think. Gotta keyframe the scale a little bit. Okay, definitely looks like we're going to have to move our asset down a little bit here, just so that it looks like it's actually connecting with it. So for whatever reason, it looks like it's hovering above the element there. We might also be a little bit overzealous with the size there as well, so let's bring that down a lot. I'll just increase the feathering a little bit. And it's starting to help quite a bit. I'm going to bring in a new asset. I'm going to bring in this water crash effect, which is going to just help us sort of sell the idea that we've got this big water explosion thing happening, because it's a little bit difficult to solve this issue here. It looks a bit contrived. So we'll go... that's the whole thing with assets as well, as you can combine several assets. You might just use these to enhance a live action effect or something. Alright, so let's move this over. Increase the size, move the anchor point again like we did with the other asset. Let's just move it over and try and decide what's going to happen here. Okay. Might need to darken this one down a little bit. Let's go. I'm going to do a little bit of color correction here. I'll put it to full res. I like to use the tritone effect, which just allows us to control the brightness of the midtones and the highlights individually. So for example, I just want to bring the highlights down a little bit, but keep the midtones intact. Let's put that over our asset here. Gonna have to bring, they are 3D layers, so we don't want to end up with any sort of Z fighting issues. Make a keyframe for the position here, move that over a bit. Because remember, all these assets are slowly sort of dragging to the left to try and see, because if the water's moving to the left, it would suggest that there's also wind as well. Bring this over. Maybe bring this down just a little bit. I'm also going to do the same thing we did last time. Create a mask. Every time you create an effect, you can always just go to the opacity and maybe bring it down a bit rather than changing the actual effect that you did. So now might be a good time to have a little look at what we've done. Definitely going to have to increase the size of that water impact thing. Might even increase the speed of it as well. Essentially I'm just trying to use it as like an extra asset to sort of bridge the gap between what we're trying to do. Sometimes when you double click on a layer, it actually opens it up, which we don't want to do. Increase that feathering. Let's try bringing this closer to us a little bit more. We'll change the anchor point just a little bit. Bring the scale down a little bit. We could do some color correction on our water blast element here. Could always just put it to screen mode. Because it has an alpha channel, we get some nice sort of values, so I'm just going to do the tritone effect on it. Might actually just copy what I did from the other layer, bring that in. Maybe a slight little adjustment there. And let's preview this back. That's looking quite interesting. I still want there to be more water coming over that element there. Yeah, you see, when it gets to here, I sort of want it to look like there's more water coming over here, so we don't have just that harsh line. We could also achieve that effect by going into the position of our main water blast element and maybe pulling that towards us a little bit, just so it looks like it's in the middle of all this. And we can also do the same with our water crash element. Get rid of those keyframes there. Have to be careful that you're not making extra keyframes unintentionally. And it might even, what we can also do as well, we'll solo the water blast layer, enable the mask, put a keyframe for the mask path and feathering, so that by the time it gets to here we can increase the feathering quite a bit more, and then also move the mask up a bit as well. That always seems to happen to me, doesn't it? The whole point of this is, you know, every time we go and make one of these little adjustments, we're slightly improving it. I wonder how much we could bring that down before that becomes an issue. What I think would help quite a bit is if we brought the opacity of this layer down here a bit as well. We could even keyframe that. Keyframe the opacity. You know, considering that this asset is only HD, it's supposed to stay in frame, and it's a 2D asset, and we've essentially put it right into the middle of this kind of 3D camera shot, and it holds up pretty well, to be honest. I wonder what it's going to look like when the camera completely passes through it. What might actually help is if we duplicate our asset a little bit. Because it is just one 2D layer, when the camera passes through it, it does become quite obvious that it is just a 2D layer. So if we were to move this one back a little bit, animate the opacity so that it just comes in towards the end, increase that feathering a bit. It'll just make it look like we're passing through a few different layers. In fact, we can even do that again. I'm just going to duplicate what I did and move this back even more. So now we're passing through multiple layers. I'm just going to create, you know, the illusion of some sort of depth. Make sure we're just bringing in the opacity when we need it. I wonder how long this tutorial can go on for. There we go. Now when the camera passes through it, yeah, it looks a little bit more 3D. This here could still be an issue. We're still getting quite a sharp sort of connection to the asset there. So I'm going to keyframe the feathering of this mask here again. It might seem like we're just making endless random adjustments and stuff, but with each adjustment that we make, we are slowly getting it towards looking a bit more convincing, just so when you watch it back, your eyes aren't like horrifically offended by something. I think adding that feathering there is really helping. And you've got to remember, if you're going to put a crop on your movie as well, you're not going to see all this funny business here anyway, but that's not the point. We want it to look good. When we put the motion blur back on this as well, definitely going to help. Let's feather that a lot more. Okay, we're going to have to animate this as well. You can still see there's a bit of a sharp line here from the other asset, so we're just going to make sure that we're dealing with that. Just a case of moving this up a bit. Obviously, if we increase the feathering, it reveals more through the mask, and so we have to move it up a bit more. Okay, let's have another preview. This is going to be a long tutorial if I don't wrap this up. Let's see, I think the beginning there could probably be improved somehow. I think honestly it's probably, let's see, it still looks like you're getting a bit of a sharp sort of edge there, which doesn't look very convincing. Might just be a case of, yeah, adding more feathering to this thing. And go and increase the feathering here as well. Yeah, see, if we just feather that a little bit. Making a few more keyframes now, just you see, that's what we don't want. We don't want that sharp line. If we can just have a slightly more soft transition, it's going to help quite a bit. And our water crash element here, let's see, could that be any better? Haven't even experimented around with any blending modes yet. I mean, that's interesting. We give it a soft light blending mode. It creates quite a subtle effect. I don't know if that's really improving things. It's quite interesting. Only I think having it there did help. I'm just moving the anchor point down a bit so I can get it where I want it to be. Might even animate those values a little bit. That looks okay. So let's increase that feathering a bit. Now this might be a little bit of a risky thing to do midway through an unscripted tutorial, but we could just do something crazy like this. We take all these layers and we'll just duplicate them, make them a different color. Move it over, say here or something. We need to, if we're going to move the position, we've got all these positional keyframes, we do need to make sure that we're going to select all of them, and then in theory we can just move them around like this because we've done all the work. If you do move something all the way over somewhere else, you know, you can bet that you're going to have to make some adjustments. Oops, I didn't select all the positional keyframes. Sometimes rather than trying to grab one of these, I'll just left click, hold down shift, move it up a little bit. Of course I don't want to move it up because then it's going to be floating above the water. So We just want to move it back instead. You could probably get away with moving it up just a tiny bit, but just remember it's going to be hovering above the water in that case. So now that we've created, the one asset, we put all that work into making one asset, work. Now we can just, oops, I did it again. You've got to be so careful with these keyframes. If I want to move it over there, it has to be one of the beginning keyframes. Because otherwise, if you try moving it somewhere else, you're just going to create a new keyframe. Anyway, let's duplicate this again. I'm going to move this below everything else. This is just going to give you an idea of how we actually did what we did in the video that you saw. I'm going to try moving this one back all the way over here, see if it still works. I don't know, we'll try moving it over there. I keep saying that I'm not going to make this mistake, and I just keep making the same mistake. I'm just going to have a crazy floating asset in that case. Move it over there. Just try moving it back quite a bit. I'll have this one go off first in the background there. And of course, for all the little bullet effects that were going off, it was just essentially the same thing we did. That was a lot easier though. If you want to add the reflections into the water, we'll just duplicate the main element here, and we'll just go to scale, select both of these keyframes, and we'll just mirror the effect. I'll just delete that keyframe. I don't know why it's doing that. I'll just do whatever needs to be done myself. I'll just increase that out. And then of course you can just put that to soft light, bring the opacity down, and then you'll have to create a mask. Get rid of this mask. Create our own one here. And then that's how you do the reflections. It's fairly easy. Of course, in a situation like this, you'd want to animate the mask a little bit. If I select this pen tool here, we can hold down left click and drag and create something a bit more smooth like that. Actually put a keyframe and just go through it. I'll just make sure that the reflection happens at the right place. And then we're going to wrap this tutorial up pretty soon, because I think I've showed, and you can see you could take these techniques and you could add like tons of bullet effects going off and everything. And obviously we just had more assets going off back there. And like I said, all the assets that we're using in this tutorial will just be included in the file, so you don't have to go and buy any extra plugins or anything like that. That's a good point. We've done this 100% in After Effects, and you're free to do whatever you want with these assets. Go ahead and make your own version of this type of effect in your own shot. If I've included them for free, then you can just assume that you can do whatever you want with them. You could even use them for commercial use if you wanted. Got absolutely no problem with that. But yeah, I think this would be a good place to wrap this up. Okay, so thanks for joining us on this tutorial. Stay tuned for more content which we'll be bringing out shortly. And until then, thanks for watching.